ABC4 Amarillo. The 10 o'clock news starts now.
Would you know what to do if your ordinary drive home took a turn for the worse? Good evening, everyone. I'm Jay Ritchie.
And I'm Nylin Nichols. With cases of road rage on the rise, the possibility you'll be chased by someone also is going up.
But it doesn't have to end in tragedy. All new at 10 tonight, NBC4's Todd Gladfelter tells us how to protect ourselves. Todd?
Well, Jay, that whole scenario can be very frightening, especially for women traveling alone. This deadly accident last month happened when the victim's car was pushed onto the railroad tracks by a man chasing her. Now, tragedies like this one are rare, but it shows how important it is to remember to stay focused on where you're going.
A door cracked open ever so slightly.
I stood there for a moment, examined the door, also listened. I couldn't hear any voices to indicate that anybody was inside.
The windows were obstructed, so he couldn't see inside.
Iowa City Police, can I help you?
Troy, who's this?
And since he wasn't in uniform, he called headquarters for backup.
I've got an open door over here. I don't want to go in plain clothes.
But then Kelsey spotted a patrol car, flagged down its two officers, and motioned to one of them.
I pointed to the door that was standing ajar and said, I have an open door. He got out and began to approach the building. I looked at him and nodded that I was ready for whatever he did next.
But there's another side to this story. What the officers didn't know was that this warehouse was an art studio. Eric Shaw, a talented 31-year-old sculptor, was inside, talking on the telephone to David Butita, his business partner and best friend. They often worked here late at night.
It was the coolest part of the day, so we'd work at night, off until 2, 3, 4 in the morning.
As they talked, Eric sat just a few feet away from that door, cracked open to catch a breeze.
It wasn't uncommon for a policeman to drive by and roll down his window and ask us how we're doing.
But on this night, police said nothing. They moved in suddenly, without warning. As the officers approached the door, each of them had his gun drawn. Officer Jeffrey Gillespie, who was wearing a bulletproof vest, went first. With his gun in his right hand and a flashlight in his left, he slowly opened the door. He had no idea that just inside was Eric Shaw. And the phone was still in his hand.
I remember him inhaling, like he was shocked.
Suddenly there was a bang. Jeff's gun was falling to the ground. He was raising up all at the same time and backing away, bobbing up and down.
Officer Gillespie had just shot Eric Shaw.
911. We just heard a phone call that said that there was a shooting down at our place of business. Is that true? We need to know what happened. Could you hold on for just a minute, please? This is what we've heard about it. Could you hold on, please? Yes.
Jay and Blossom Shaw couldn't wait. They hung up and started out the door for Eric's studio.
Just as we were leaving, just as we were ready to close the door, the phone rang. The police called us back. A supervisor called and said, we're sending somebody out.
What happened? Well, that's I'd like to explain to you what happened.
What do you mean, like to explain? What did you kill our son?
A police officer did, yes.
Why? Are you kidding me, you stupid ass son of a bitch?
Yeah, I know.
When somebody tells you that your child has been shot by the police, you come up against a wall that is so high and so big and so black that you can't get around it and you can't get over it and you can't get under it and you can't do anything with it at all.
The officer who fired the shot, Jeffrey Gillespie, 26 years old, told investigators he'd made a mistake. At first he said he'd been startled to find Eric right behind that door. Later he said he'd flinched and pulled the trigger. Gillespie was put on temporary leave. A few weeks later came a surprising announcement.
No criminal charges will be filed against Jeffrey Gillespie.
County Attorney J. Patrick White says Officer Gillespie was dead wrong that night.
He was negligent. He was guilty of police malpractice. He resorted to the use of deadly force without justification.
But committed no crime.
That's correct.
No crime, he says, because under Iowa state law, the charge of involuntary manslaughter requires proof that the killer acted recklessly.
There was no evidence that he acted recklessly.
I'm not a lawyer, but it seems to me that it is common sense, isn't it, that when a police officer opens the door, shoots an unsuspecting citizen in his place of work without saying a word, that that's reckless.
No, I don't think it is.
And so Jay Shaw spoke out at city council meetings and wrote letter after letter to city papers demanding justice.
It's no more understandable than if a policeman were simply to walk up to a man on the street and kill him.
But what does the law say? Can police officers enter any open door without even announcing themselves? What about a search warrant? Doesn't the Constitution specifically prohibit this kind of activity? Surprisingly, the answer may be no.
1052 and route.
The Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches, but when it comes to an open door, the issue has not been resolved in court.
10443,
And so, police departments decide what their officers can and cannot do on the street.
Why didn't you announce yourself? Eric would have come out, and he would have said, it's me.
Eric would have said, hey, guys, I'm in here, I'm on the phone. We would have apologized for bothering him.
So why not do it that way?
If there were burglars in there, how might the burglars would have responded?
But they weren't.
Correct, there weren't.
Who's there? You don't know who's there yet. And you're trying to determine what's inside the building. That's what they were doing.
Chief Winkelhake argues that no one should second-guess officers on the scene, even when they go through an open door with their guns drawn.
If they're going in because they think there's a burglar there, I think they're foolish if they don't go in.
Looking back on this, is there anything you did that was wrong?
If the situation happened again, might I act the same? Yes, I might.
I mean, if he's saying that he would do nothing different, he's telling me that he would kill my son again.
Justice seems to be a very empty concept right now.
As a member of Iowa City's grand jury, Lori Klockow wanted to hear the Eric Shaw case and perhaps bring an indictment. But remember County Attorney Patrick White, who refused to prosecute? He told Klockow to back off.
He said, Lori, you are tinkering with people's lives, and you need to be cautious. And I said, are you threatening me? What do you mean? And he said, well, of course I'm not threatening you. But I took it very much as a threat to me.
I just thought, and still do, that it was not a good idea to revisit the decision that I had made.
But that's not what a judge thought. White was ordered to step aside so that a special prosecutor could present the case to a grand jury. White still refuses and is appealing to Iowa's Supreme Court. Officer Gillespie, the man who killed Eric Shaw, was allowed to resign and has since left town. Kelsey and the other officer on the scene that night remain on the force without a reprimand, still carrying their guns.
Though Eric Shaw's parents received a $1.5 million settlement from Iowa City, County Attorney Pat White's appeal to the Iowa Supreme Court succeeded, and grand jury proceedings into the shooting were stopped. Eric Shaw was killed when police procedure was abandoned in the heat of the moment. Let's turn now to another high-tension situation in which snap decisions by the police can threaten the safety of innocent bystanders.
There is perhaps no case that better illustrates the devastating consequences when the system fails to root out bad cops than the case of Officer Timothy Harris. Tim Harris began his career here at the Melbourne Village Police Department. It was also here that he began a practice that would ultimately prove deadly. While a patrolman here as far back as 1978, Harris began stopping women, taking their driver's licenses and keeping them, and using the names and addresses from those licenses to pursue them. Because of his actions, Harris was asked to resign from this police department, but in spite of that, they gave him highly favorable recommendations, which he used to get his next job in law enforcement. This was Officer Harris's record at the Melbourne Village Police Department. He had been suspended once, he had 3 allegations of serious violations pending against him, and he was described by the Melbourne Director of Public Safety as totally incompetent and not fit to be a policeman. But this is the recommendation the same agency gave him. He is trustworthy, intelligent, and has a high sense of responsibility toward his profession as a police officer. With that, Harris moved on, and in 1982 applied to the Florida Highway Patrol. It was in that job, a job in which Harris patrolled the roads virtually unsupervised, he began having an affair, visiting his girlfriend while on duty, then returning to his wife. When his wife found out about the affair, Tim Harris's life and marriage began to unravel, and he returned to his old ways, using his job to stalk women. From this vantage point, parked here along I-95, Officer Tim Harris could see the drivers in the cars coming toward him. He admits he chose this location to pick out attractive women. Then, using his authority as a policeman, he'd pull them over. Attorney Michael Whalen.
Tim frequently referred to women as sluts. He would ride down the road yelling to them, sexual comments, sticking his head out his truck window, flicking his tongue at them with other police officers in the car.
Officer Harris also began writing lewd comments on traffic tickets and decorating his car with obscene cartoons. But apparently no one turned him in. When his wife Sandy asked for a divorce, Harris lost control. Sandy's brother-in-law, Vero Beach Police Captain Don Dappin.
He was starting to become unkempt. He was living in parking lots. He was living at rest stops on the interstate.
Were these signs the Florida Highway Patrol should have picked up?
In my opinion?
Yeah.
Yes.
One night, Officer Harris followed Sandy to a local bar and began dragging her by the neck. When her brother-in-law tried to intervene, Harris exploded in rage, swearing and screaming at Don Dappin. Were you concerned with his behavior that Harris might harm someone in the general public?
Yes, I was. And I expressed that concern to his supervisors.
Captain Dappin says he even wrote a letter to the Florida Highway Patrol, but no disciplinary action was taken against Officer Harris. On Sunday morning, March 4th, Trooper Harris set out to work, and a young woman named Lorraine Hendricks set out on a trip south.
Lorraine left Jacksonville about 7 o'clock in the morning to drive down to take care of some business in Fort Lauderdale. What happened next was pieced together after the fact, of course.
Lorraine, a vibrant woman committed to family and community, was planning to see some old friends, unaware that on her trip she would encounter a deeply disturbed police officer.
She trusted authority, and she would not be someone who would have just stopped for anyone.
After missing days of work and feeling out of control, Tim Harris says that in desperation, he asked his supervisors for help. On Friday, March 2nd, he pleaded to be taken off the road, but he was told to work the weekend. A meeting with a psychiatrist was set up for the following week. Before that could happen, the paths of Officer Harris and Lorraine Hendricks would cross.
So I sat at the north end of 95 in Indian River and started thinking about a lot of things and really nowhere to go. Really didn't want to be there. Just knew I shouldn't have been there.
She didn't call that afternoon.
Lorraine's husband, Rick Hendricks.
You know, we never heard anything. So all of a sudden, you know, she just vanishes. Nothing.
Tim Harris spoke in prison for the first time to producer Karen Burns.
So when Lorraine Hendricks came driving by, was she doing something wrong?
I originally stopped her for wearing headsets. Got out of hand.
Got out of hand. What was it in the, I mean, what made you stop her?
I didn't even know her.
At 11:30 that morning, Officer Tim Harris ordered Lorraine Hendricks into his car. The handles were removed from the doors. There was no way out. Then he drove her to a secluded spot off I-95 where highway patrol officers often stopped to rest.
But you drove up. You went up to her car.
She's an innocent person. Then I just said, I didn't care. Nothing was working right, so I didn't care. And I let loose with all my anger on her.
You weren't expecting this to happen.
I exploded on her.
According to police reports and Harris's own testimony, he slowly raped, tortured, and finally strangled Lorraine Hendricks. Throughout, he called her Sandy, the name of his ex-wife. Lorraine pleaded for her life. But Officer Tim Harris was too far gone. Lorraine died that afternoon. Later, Harris returned to the scene and hid Lorraine's body in pine needles. Then the officer returned to work. He would stay on the job for another 4 weeks until he was finally arrested.
I went back because I didn't believe it actually happened. I found her. I couldn't tell anybody.
What did you feel like when you went back out there and realized you'd done that?
I wanted to go down and just turn my gun in, take my uniform off, and just walk away.
Lorraine's husband, Rick Hendricks, who proudly wears the uniform of the United States Army, feels profoundly betrayed.
You can't be angry at a person. You know, it's like the system, you know, violated your trust.
Do you think about it a lot now?
Yes.
What do you think when you think about it?
That lady should never have died. Should have never been stopped.
For Hendricks, telling his daughter how her mother died was the hardest thing he ever had to do.
You don't want to have to go to your 6-year-old daughter and say, Mom's never coming home again because Officer Friendly killed her.
When we come back, a corrupt precinct in Philadelphia and police reform in Buffalo. Next on Justice Files.